Yeah. All right, morning everyone. Kia ora. Oh, awesome. Welcome to our Strategy, Operations and Finance Committee meeting of Thursday the 5th of December. To elected members, both councillors and community board representatives. To staff also, thank you, and to the members of the public, welcome, and look forward to hearing from a bunch of you in just a minute. So we'll start with our council blessing. Ia mātou e whiriwhiri ana i ngā take kei mua i o mātou aroaro. E pono ana mātou ka kaha tonu ki te whakapau mahara huapai mo ngā hāpore e mahi nei mātou. Me kaha hoki mātou katoa kia whaihua kia tōtika tā mātou mahi, a mā te maia te tiro whakamua me te hihiri, ka taia te arahi I roto I te kotahitanga me te aroha. And that means as we deliberate on the issues before us, we trust that we will reflect positively on the communities we serve. Let us all seek to be effective and just so that with courage, vision and energy, we provide positive leadership in a spirit of harmony and compassion. So moving on to item number 3, apologies. There seem to be none unless the table is aware of any. Nope, declarations of interest relating to the items on the agenda today. Also, none have been presented to myself. So that takes us swiftly on to public speaking time for items relating to the agenda. So first up, we've got 2 public speakers wanting to contribute on item 9.1, Economic Development Strategy 2024 to 2027. So I'd like to invite Monique Leith, please, to come to the table. Or we can go with Darren first, if that's better. Yeah, cool. Darren Hunter, if you could please come to the table, and then we'll invite Monique up next. Kia ora. Thanks, Darren. If you just press the button on the right-hand side of your microphone. Great, over to you, and you've got 3 minutes.
Okay, thanks. My name's Darren Hunter. I'm actually speaking in support of what Monique's about to say, so I was sort of asked about face. I should have speak after her, but that's okay. So I've known Monique for over 10 years, and she's a planner, used to work at council. We've had a couple of in-depth conversations about the stresses and the anxiety of dealing with KCDC in regards to compliance and the so-called pathways that council believe they've set up for helping people to meet those compliance and regulatory requirements. It's actually failing. As an architectural designer for 28 years in Kapiti, I'm seeing more and more people walking away from the district because of the compliance and the so-called portal of the Economic Development Unit to try and help those people establish businesses in Kapiti. It's not working, it's failing miserably. You've got large-scale developers walking away. The regulatory team have got obviously some rules that they've got in place that they follow. The economic development team are purely becoming messengers. They've got no capacity to change anything. They're a catalyst or a conduit between the difficulty in the community and the council. It doesn't achieve anything. You've got a very broken system. We've got huge, let's say, unemployment within the building sector. The economic development team doesn't even have a construction sector within their goals. And you know, you say that KCDC is the biggest employer, one of the biggest employers, if not the biggest employer, and it's a regulatory body. It's bureaucrats. The biggest employer in Kapiti is actually the construction sector. So you have all these hurdles in front of people that are effectively driving people away. In 28 years, I've seen compliance and the inability to get things done is getting worse. And it's only reflective of the financial crisis this year that people are just pulling the pin on projects, and it's largely due to the first steps going through council. The economic development team doesn't create that conduit between the two. It's purely coming back with bad information. It seems that everything, or should I say bad, the hurdles that are imposed on people are presented early, which puts people off from developing in Kapiti. So Monique, who's a planner who deals directly with us day to day, is sort of the first cab off the rank when it comes to this stuff. As a designer, then we've got to try and fit within those parameters. But I'm imploring you to actually say that to look at the system. The economic development side of it is not working. You're spending hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars on this type of stuff, and you just need to get back to core business. And there seems to be a regime of just creating bureaucratic creep when it's unnecessary. Things worked perfectly okay 10, 15, 20, 25 years ago, and it just seems that you're piling on the regulation, you're piling on the rules that you're interpreted from central government. Such things, as an example, I've recently had a swimming pool constructed in Manly Street. It cost $10,000 to get compliance to dig a hole for the swimming pool, which was a $4,000 hole. So there's vast numbers of examples that people can give you, but I just think you need to have a hard look at yourselves and give some people some time of day and listen to what people have got to say, because I think you're doing the community a disservice.
Thank you for, thanks for your comments. Are there any questions from the table? Councillor Pravanov.
Thank you. Through the chair, thank you, Darren, for coming along today. So, if there was one or two things that could be done to help improve the system, what would they be?
I think you need to look at the level of compliance. The council here seem to be interpreting central government's, let's say, guidelines and rules and policies and expanding on those, which is making things onerously expensive and onerously difficult to get through. So, for argument's sake, why does a swimming pool need a $10,000 cost to dig a hole? Ironically, there was already a swimming pool there that had been filled with sand. Why does it cost $10,000 to dig a $4,000 hole when it could have been dealt with with plumbing and drainage? It became a planning issue which required an extensive report. It required extra architectural drawings. It required engineering input. The regulatory stuff needs to be pulled back. It seems that they're creating jobs for themselves by actually just laying on more levels of compliance. So pull back on the compliance. Look at areas that don't need compliance, or maybe could be dealt with as a group exercise rather than each individual department. And the relevance for economic development is they seem to get dragged into it, and they're not equipped, they're not skilled, they haven't got enough in-depth in the construction industry to actually provide the answers, and they're not there to circumnavigate the rules because the rules are the rules. The economic development doesn't work. They're just basically there to show people that this is the level of compliance you need, and that's where it begins and ends.
All right, thanks Darren. Thanks, Councillor Pravanov. We have quite a few lights on, so we'll take Kim Tahiwi, a question from you, and then Liz and Rob, if you could evaluate whether your question is required.
Kia ora, my name is Kim Tahiwi, and I agree. I come from a long line of developers, and over the years, if I listen to my father, this problem has gotten systematically worse. My question is, when is the last time you can remember, because there are some people around this table and around this area who can remember a time where it wasn't so hard. Realistically, when is the last time you can remember that this seemingly worked well, because currently it does not?
Without getting too political, I think it was probably 2 terms ago before Labor got in. They've got this level of the Resource Management Act has been so 2 terms of Labor government. Prior to that was good, and that was a combination of Labor and national governments seem to have a sort of a control or a sensibility about it. So I've been here since '98, so I'd say 2 terms ago. So in the last 8 to 10 years,
I'd probably argue a bit before that,
right.
Yeah, no, that's all I wanted to know. Thank you.
Kia ora, we'll go to Mayor Holbrook now. Sorry.
Yeah, I was going to call a point of order, but I don't think I need to, because I just want to draw us back to the paper that's in front of us, which is the Economic Development Strategy, which is about supporting business and supporting our industry clusters, if you like. And we're straying into a conversation about regulatory services, and I'm not seeing the connection with the paper that's in front of us.
Okay.
So I just encourage us, if we're going to ask questions.
I can elaborate on that. So councils seem to think that the economic development is a conduit between business and council. It's not. But it's not working. You're spending vast amounts of money on salaries for people that are ill-equipped to deal with the regulatory requirements that's set by a completely different part of council.
Okay, thanks, Darren. I feel like you've made that point quite clearly. Councillor Coe?
Look, Darren, we all know that there's been problems in the regulatory space. I'm just curious as to what leads you to the conclusion that economic development is responsible for being the conduit. At the moment, we're in the process of spinning out economic development into a trust and a company arm's length from council. The regulatory side of things will stay within council. I've sit on the Economic Development Kotahitanga board. I've never sort of picked up on the fact that ED is responsible for the being a conduit between the two. Yes, it does get involved, but I'm just wondering what's led you to that.
Well, I can give you an example. The food centre that was going to be in Kapiti Road, ED were all over it trying to establish some sort of food court. Money was given to establish some things that happened, and the whole thing died, dead and buried. And a lot of that was to do with the ED team were involved. Ratepayers are paying for all of that. There was no outcomes. You had no deliverables, and now you're talking about setting up another. So the bigger picture of that is you're still talking about something outside of council, which is funded by council. How is something outside of council going to function any better than people like Monique Leith and myself, who've been in the industry for 28 years, and having every time someone wants to develop something in Kapiti, unfortunately it requires a regulatory sign-off of something.
Yep, I agree.
So how is...
Is it not better for that to be sorted out within the regulatory space? And I agree it needs a lot of sorting out. I absolutely agree.
28 years I've been here, Liz.
Yep.
Still waiting.
Yep.
All right, thank you. I feel like if we could close off that conversation, because there is just one more question from Councillor Cooper, and then we'll move on.
So, but your assertion, or is it your assertion, Darren, that when the new economic trust is set up, there will be even more disconnect between economic development and the council wheels? Orders?
Yeah. I've heard clients who have walked away from projects who said the advice they had received was that they should go and see the economic development unit to do a development, and then they have asked me, well, what do they bring to the table? That they themselves can't engage some consultants to help them get them through the process.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Cooper, and thank you, Darren. I appreciate you coming to speak with us this morning. Next up, Monique Leith, if you could join us at the table. Kia ora. And Monique's also speaking to item 9.1, the Economic Development Strategy 24 to 27. Awesome. Thanks, Cam.
Kia ora koutou katoa, can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you good.
I present before you today to address a significant and urgent concern that is hindering the prosperity of our local businesses and discouraging investment in our district. That is the total dysfunction of Council's regulatory department. While the intention behind regulations is to maintain order, the current processing environment is characterised by constant overreach, disorganised and uninterested attitudes, and a horrible culture which those paying customers often treated as an inconvenience. This environment is 100% stifling innovation and appetite for investment. In this district, local entrepreneurs and investors are facing completely unnecessary barriers as applications are mired in bureaucratic red tape, leading to continuous back and forth and ultimately causing dissatisfaction and the abandonment of projects. From what I can see as someone who is often called on to help when things turn to custard, is the issues are only getting worse. I contacted Council CDE and the ED team in January this year to raise issues being experienced by industry and to help with finding solutions. I never had a response from the CA despite follow-ups. And here we are, 12 whole months later, and things have gone from quite bad to disastrous. To be clear, these are more than just the usual regulatory hurdles we expect to jump through when we go to Council for regulatory applications. As someone who deals with multiple regulatory departments across the North Island, the experiences of carpeted customers is the worst. Recently, there has been implementation of new interpretations with procedures and no consultation or processes in place. Council staff, including the CA, are very quick to blame consultants for delays and costs when concerns are raised, and there is no dedicated overarching manager available to quickly resolve issues. It's a hopeless situation from a customer perspective, and it's costing the community dearly, financially, emotionally, mentally. Regulatory is a bread and butter operation for council. It sits squarely within the realm of what this coalition government refers to as back to basics. So it's something that council should be striving to be doing well before thinking about investing in incentives that fall outside the back to basics realm. It is also a revenue stream for council. Customers dealing with the regulatory department are either investors in development or business owners. They are funding council's commercial rates as well as paying for that particular regulatory application to be processed. Significant investment in this department is required, and it's required today and every day to turn this reputation around. There appears to be absolutely nothing proposed in the new ED strategy to specifically address this. However, we cannot wait for yet another document to be printed for change to occur. Every opportunity needs to be made by council to turn this ship around. Thank you for the opportunity to talk today.
Kia ora, Monique. Thank you for coming along. Are there questions from the table? Roimati Community Board Chair Bede Larissy.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Monique. It was good to see you in the
Sorry, I'm
chambers.
just looking at my captions as well,
No,
so I'm
that's
not being
okay.
rude.
Yeah, I understand. You've obviously worked a lot in this area. This is something that probably we all hear mutterings about from time to time, but you're sort of knees deep in it. Can you give us an example or two of the kind of thing that you're dealing with so that we can understand what your problem is?
Yeah. I can give you lots of examples. I appreciate you've got a full agenda today. I guess a really recent example of, the structural dysfunction is that, a couple of months ago, council decided to require building consent for private services within a right-of-way. It's never been required by this council in the history of KCDC before. No consultation was undertaken with industry. And so what we're dealing with as a customer perspective is we've got a resource consent with conditions requiring engineering approval, engineering design, engineering supervision, final sign-off by engineers. And now we need a separate process altogether to comply also with the building code. Now the engineering code is different to the building consent process. They're not the same standards. Engineering code is generally higher. You cannot design services to achieve compliance with both. So they've always been processed against the engineering code. And we find out about this by architects applying for a code of compliance, a final certification for a new house build. And they're told by council they won't be issuing that because those services are illegal. That's the kind of communication you get. If you're illegal, it's like, what? So we get calls from those people saying, council's saying the service is illegal. What? It takes a couple of weeks to get a meeting with council to talk this through. They're not illegal. They've been through resource consent. The conditions require engineering approval. That is an expensive tens of thousands of dollars process to go through. You've got engineering approval from the council. You've had the engineering and clerk of works coming out to inspect along the way and sign it off, and then you have to apply for final engineering approval as part of the subdivision. Those services are brand new. They are absolutely to spec. And council turn around and, as part of someone who's trying to get this final sign off, when finances are really tough at that end game, to say, those services are illegal, we won't be issuing that CCC.
So just to contextualise that, how does that differ with dealing with other councils?
Absolutely, it's not a requirement here and anywhere else. But I guess at the end of the day, it's an attitude thing. You don't feel valued. You're not treated as a valued customer. You're treated as an inconvenience. and if you raise concern, you are the problem. And that's kind of the narrative that comes out. And so there's no willingness to help. There's no willingness to, hey, let's get through this together, you know. It's a culture.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you, Monique. I'm not seeing any other lights on from the table. So, yeah, we really appreciate you coming and sharing your thoughts. And, yeah, have a good rest of your day.
Take care.
Okay, so now we'll move on to public speakers relating to item 9.3, responding to the Coastal Advisory Panel's report. Roger, I don't think, is wanting to speak anymore. Cool. Okay, so we'll go straight to Isabel Malarat. Welcome to the table, and you've got 3 minutes. If you could just press the button on the right-hand side of your microphone, and then it's over to you. Awesome.
Thank you. Good morning. Yes, I'm here speaking on agenda item 9.3, responding to the Coastal Advisory Panel's report. I've spoken at other council meetings and community board meetings over the poor engagement throughout the CAP process, but today I want to speak in a broader sense. When I read the agenda for today's meeting, I was shocked that there was no mention of Dr. DeLonghi's report and that it appears that you are going straight to progressing the work of CAP. I had the good fortune to attend the presentation by Dr. DeLonghi at the Crew AGM and to read his report. I came away from his presentation in good spirits, thinking that his exemplary credentials and well-researched information allayed my fears about the extreme outcomes that had come from the Takatai Kapiti CAP process. And to be honest, I breathed a sigh of relief. But that seems to be short-lived, given we're sitting here today once again looking at the CAP report, which has now turned me into the Christmas Grinch. I know that Dr. DeLonghi's work meets the statutory requirements and presumed things would progress from there. I was also expecting that his report would be placed on our limbs, alongside that of the Jacobs report. As a ratepayer on 2 properties, I contributed to the over $5 million spent on the Takatai Kapiti process, and not by choice. I then voluntarily contributed to Crew to enable an independent report to be done, which appears to be being ignored. I am not happy about any more of my money being wasted. I have many concerns, such as that you are progressing with a report that is fundamentally flawed, that we are progressing with a report that does not meet the National Coastal Policy Statement and ignoring the one that does, which will not cost the ratepayer anything more. More cost to the ratepayer when this work is not statutorily required. In Table 2, you talk of reputational damage if you do not progress with this proposed work program. There appears to be partners and stakeholders that you want to appease, and it appears that they are taking precedence over the residents and ratepayers that you are here to serve. I would suggest that if you proceed with yet another drawn-out, expensive process that is not based on likely effects and does not meet statutory requirements, then you will be seeing a different kind of reputational damage. The spotlight is already on council with the high rates increases and forecast increases for the next 10 years. We may not be able to have any influence over council staff, but we do have a say in which councillors and mayor are elected next year. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Isabel. Questions from the table. Councillor Cooper.
Thank you, Isabel. Just a quick question. So we've got the CAPS work that costs millions of dollars based on the Jacobs report that is now disputed in an up-to-date report. How do you think council should reconcile all that work that was done that has got some good stuff within the process and now moving forward? How should council reconcile that?
Well, there may well be some good stuff in the CAP report, but it seems to me that that is all that's on the table at the moment. So I don't see where Dr. DeLonghi's report is sitting in this work. And I want some assurances that that is going to be on the table as part of this process. So I don't know, you tell me.
So you would like Dr. DeLonghi's report, which is a very good report, I've read it, you would like that to be used in council's decision making and planning and forward thinking?
Absolutely, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So would I.
Now to Councillor Halliday.
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Isabel, for your presentation. First of all, I just wanted to check, you're aware that the CAP process is part of the process with regards to a coastal plan change and the lead into a coastal plan change?
Well, it is, but should it be?
Okay, so would it be a fair comment to say that in regards to any sort of, should we say, renewal of a council strategy or council documents, that there's processes that we go through to get to that being updated? We have the various strategies that are on a 10-year cycle to be updated, and we're way behind on the coastal one. Rights or wrongs of why we're behind in it is part of the reason why we're at this table at the moment, with regards to crew and with regards to other conditions that were put in place with regards to addressing the update of the coastal strategy. Would it be a fair comment to say that with those various things that come to the table, CAP is part of that process? Would it be fair to say that there will be other parts of that process as well, and potentially the report that you're referring to? And I'm not saying that it's not in this report. This report is a specific report, but it's not the coastal policy update report, or this is not part of the coastal plan change report. This is feeding in, this is the result of the CAP process, which we were legally
Thanks,
required
Martin.
to do.
I think you've made your point
Oh,
clear.
sorry,
So
thank you.
the question was, is that understood by the public speaker, by Isabel? Yeah.
I have to say that I'm not entirely understanding of what you're saying. And I think those questions are better answered by crew, and I think some of the statements you just made would be disputed by crew. And I'm not here to speak on that. I have a reasonably good understanding of the process, but I'm not here as a expert speaker on this. I'm here as a resident and ratepayer, and for what I see happening, I'm not happy with.
Okay, fully appreciating that. But a comment you did make, you said that's all that's on the table at the moment. And I just want to highlight, you're right, it is all that's on the table at the moment, because this is a process, and this is the part we're addressing at the moment. There will be other aspects that get brought into this equation. Another question I had, you talked to extreme outcomes, this report talking to extreme outcomes. Could you refer to where the extreme outcomes are referred to in this report?
In the CAP report?
No, in this report. We're here at the moment addressing the report that's
Well,
on the table.
sorry, that's misunderstood then, because I was referring to the CAP report,
Right, okay, so
which is what you're talking about here on the agenda.
again, the report that's here talks about using the most up-to-date information in regards to the coastal plan change.
Well, if that most up-to-date information is the Jacobs report, then that's not true.
That's an assumption, actually.
Okay, yeah.
Sorry, Madam Chair, that's not actually correct.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Councillor Halliday, could we,
I
could
guess,
we
I
wrap-
guess
just
what
one
I'm
final
trying to-
question and then we'll move on.
Okay, I guess what I'm trying to point out is that there's comments here that this paper is a specific paper on the CAP report with regards to our next steps in relation to the CAP report. Actually, I think this has been different than that, and I'm concerned about the I don't want to say the understandings of what this
Councillor
report
Halliday,
is today.
we're gonna keep on moving. Thank you, Councillor Wilson, and then we'll move to our next public speaker.
Thank you, Isabel. Like you, I found the DeLonghi report quite persuasive. The question is in relation to the LIM reports. So, just as a point of clarification, so I understand that you want that DeLonghi report on the LIM report. So is that, are you comfortable with that being on the LIM report along with what is currently on the LIM report until such time as something's removed? Because we can
Yes.
put as many reports as we like on the LIM report, of course.
Yes, it would be. Yeah.
Okay. That's it.
Great, thank you, Isabel.
Thank you.
Appreciate you coming to Strategy Ops and Finance this morning. All right, now,
Sorry to interrupt, Mr. Chairman. I was on the speaking report. I dropped my name off just so the councillors are aware. Just to save a bit of time. This lady duplicates my thoughts exactly.
okay, thank you for making that clear, Roger. Appreciate that. So we'll now pass over to Tanya. Lees, welcome to the table, speaking on behalf of Calm Alarmist Law Madness. So you've got 5 minutes to speak with us, and then there'll likely be some questions as well. Over
Thank
to
you. Dear Chair, elected officials and key council staff, as you may know, I represent CALM, a community-based advocacy group. To say we are concerned about the current trajectory of the council regarding coastal adaptation work would be a significant understatement. We all believe that following receipt of the CAP report by Council on June 20th, the panel would have been disbanded and ceased to exist. Yet here we are barely 6 months later, watching on in disbelief as a district planning manager, Jason Holland, has authored a report to Council to resurrect it, signed off by Chris Purvin, the strategy and growth manager. We note there was no reference whatsoever to the esteemed and peer-reviewed DeLonghi report in Jason's own report. This is a major insult not only to the community that welcomed it, to crew who commissioned it and whose members funded it, but also to Dr. DeLonghi himself, who took the time to travel to Kapiti and present it to not only the residents but council staff also. Since CALM was formed in early August last year, we have voiced our concerns at every turn. The implausible science, the fundamentally flawed Jacobs report, which isn't fit for planning purposes, the poor community engagement and the predetermined outcome of managed retreat. I could elaborate, but I only have 5 minutes. When the CAP recommendations were received on June 20th, Kapiti Coast District Council had already made life significantly harder for the residents it was supposed to serve. Let's take a trip down memory lane. With the establishment of the Coastal Advisory Panel in 2020, coastal adaptation work commenced, despite not being required by law. This was a completely voluntary task which Council took upon themselves under the guise of rising sea levels, which would apparently drive us from our homes at some stage within the next 100 years. They just couldn't say how or when. Then, without any terms of reference, the Jacobs report was commissioned, which was supposed to be a risk assessment, but somehow morphed into a vulnerability and susceptibility report. Jacobs, who just happened to be a weapons manufacturer also, used the outdated Bruin rule along with an implausible modelling scenario of RCP 8.5, which even the IPCC has said is too extreme and not used anywhere else in the world. Community engagement was woefully inadequate to the point where nobody really knew the CAP workshops were even happening. And then a few found out what was going on and told others, and suddenly the Raumati Bowling Club swelled with 200 interested residents who wanted to know exactly what managed retreat was, making the CAP chair visibly annoyed. We had to sit at tables like we were at preschool and answer loaded questions using a psychological technique known as the Delphi method, where our answers would be collated and skillfully adjusted to achieve a predetermined outcome. As there were 200 of us and we were a bit cross with the whole managed retreat thing, Council suddenly decided they felt a bit threatened and only 60 people could then go along to future meetings. If we registered with Council and were accepted, of course, and a security guard would be posted at the door to make sure the rules were adhered to. In the meantime, the coastal adaptation work undertaken by CAP spooked insurance companies, and many raised their premiums due to their perceived risk. Sometimes they refused to insure properties, which affected mortgages. Then Council decided to add hazard notices with reference to Jacobs on everybody's LIM reports. It didn't matter if you were on the coast or several kilometres inland, which then led to issues with buying and selling properties. Despite being happy in Kapiti, some residents panicked and tried to sell their homes due to uncertainty. Reports came out of central government recommending managed retreat, and we read about how emergency powers could be enacted and people forcibly removed from their homes. Services would be cut, and even access to roads and bridges stopped. Even our local iwis decided managed retreat was the best option, according to a cultural values assessment co-authored by Araha Spinks and commissioned by CAP. Dr. Spinks recently admitted to me that she hadn't even fully read the Jacobs report. CALM decided to hold community meetings to inform everyone of what was happening, and at the last meeting, 450 concerned residents showed up. Mayor Holborough and the Chief Executive attended this meeting and saw how the community felt about it all. They promised to get a second legal opinion on the LIM report, but days turned into weeks as they consulted with lawyers funded by the people. The verdict was finally in, and it was no, and then we weren't allowed to see the legal opinion. Coastal Ratepayers United realised that they needed to act, so within days, their members raised the necessary funds to commission a report by the esteemed Dr. Willem DeLonghi of Waikato University. It was finally the statutory report Council was supposed to undertake, but never got round to doing. The DeLonghi report was factual, based on likely scenarios, and found that only 49 properties were at risk instead of more than 20,000 homes in a captured area 2 kilometres inland, as stated by Jacobs.
Sorry, Tanya, we've hit 5 minutes, so if you could just wrap up.
Well,
finish your point.
Just to let you know, Crew has been given 5 minutes, but Salima is only using 1 minute, so maybe I could use some of her time. Would that be okay?
What I mean is just in the next couple of minutes, if you can wrap up.
Yeah, sure. I will definitely be finished by then. Thank you. The DeLonghi report was factual, based on likely scenarios, and found that only 49 properties were at risk instead of more than 20,000 homes in a captured area 2 kilometres inland, as stated by Jacobs. Seismic activity had a much greater probability than sea level rise, Dr. DeLonghi explained, and he even gave a presentation to everyone who attended the Crew AGM. The community were happy that managed retreat was now seemingly off the cards, and despite the pressures of a massive 17% rates rise, the people tried to get on with their lives. Then just a few weeks out from Christmas, the district planning manager, Jason Holland, decided that he wasn't quite done with CAP and the Jacobs report. It was dusted off and put back on the table, much to the confusion of the people. Why would he do this? Were there others influencing his decision? The local iwis, perhaps? The CAP process has so far cost the ratepayers over $5 million. How is a council which is heavily in debt supposed to fund this? And if it results in legal action from ratepayers, those expenses will fall on us. So what solution does CALM propose? That council votes for option B and does not proceed with the proposed work program. We don't think the community is too concerned about hurting the feelings of the partners and stakeholders, and as Jason puts it, making them feel frustrated and disengaged due to lack of progress. Nor are we too worried about reputational risk if council is not seen as taking action. It seems they're more concerned with keeping the gravy train rolling along and looking good in the process. The community's needs and well-being doesn't seem to be a factor at all, which makes us somewhat angry, considering we appear to be paying council salaries so that they can work on taking our homes. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanya. Questions? We've got Councillor Halliday first up.
Yeah, thank you, Tanya. Just 2 questions from my end. You talked to the resurrection of the CAP group. I'm under the impression that there has been disbanded. I'm just wondering whether you can refer to in this particular report where it talks to that.
Well, it's common knowledge, isn't it,
Well,
that it was disbanded. So whether it says it in the report on the agenda or not, it was disbanded, and
So that's
is
your assumption. Could I ask if
it
that's
is
your
not an assumption. It is a fact, Councillor Halliday.
Right. So, can we clarify that?
Yeah,
Sorry.
we'll pass the mic to Bede.
Sorry, Madam Chair, the question was posed. This is not argument session, this is question answer session.
Valid, and
All
I
due
think-
respect to Councillor Halliday.
And I think we're both on the same page about that question, and thank you for responding, Tanya. And so Martin, just...
Firstly, my apologies, Tanya. That was
Thank you. I know you're trying to catch us out with these questions.
No, I'm not trying to catch you out at all.
It's kind of low.
Okay, if we could shift to...
Okay, my next question. You talk about predetermined outcomes of managed retreat. Can I ask where that is in this report as well?
It doesn't have to be in the report, Councillor Halliday. It's peppered everywhere else.
Okay, thanks,
Minutes
Councillor
everywhere.
Halliday. We'll move
you.
on to Councillor Cooper.
Hallelujah.
Thank you, Tanya. It's actually the same question I asked Isabel, in that we've got a lot of work done, $5 million spent. We've got a report that is arguably outdated or flawed in certain areas, and we need to progress work in managing our environment we live in. We've got the Dr. DeLonghi report that is a very good report, but is at odds with the underlying work that informed a lot of the CAPS work. So how does the council, how should KCDC now reconcile that and move forward?
Look, I think that we all know the Jacobs report is heavily flawed. They've used the Broome Rule, which is from the 60s, that is so outdated now, and the fact that they're using an extreme scenario, RCP 8.5, it's not really worth the paper that it's printed on. So whether we cut our losses on that, the DeLonghi report has everything that we need with minimal risk, because I think we all know that to proceed with what Mr. Holland is proposing is so wrong. And I note you can't look me in the eyes when I'm talking to you. This is so wrong.
Okay,
You are screwing
Tanya,
over the people of Kapiti.
Tanya,
I'm
Tanya,
sorry.
Could you?
I'm sorry. I'm just.
Yeah, if you could actually apologise.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm
okay.
sorry for saying that.
Okay, thank you. That's
One last question.
last question.
Do you think the council should be progressing with adaptation work before we do the risk, the Schedule 1 coastal planning hazard?
No, I think that the work that you're speaking of is, I think, 7 years overdue at the moment, and I think it was part of the crew, the court action that happened. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Tanya.
Thank you, Tanya. That's all the questions that we
Thank
have.
you.
And now we'll just pass the floor to Mayor Holbrook for a second.
Yeah, I'm just speaking because as mayor, this is my chambers. Even though Sophie's sitting in the chair and she's doing a sterling job, it's really hard when people come in and they're disrespectful towards our staff. I didn't want to say anything while the public speaker's in the chair because I don't want to single anybody out. I just please request that anybody who comes to this table for the rest of this session or any time treats our staff who are sitting in this room who don't have an opportunity to respond with respect. It's a simple request. Thank you. I know this, that this and from time to time other issues are really emotional, but please, just in terms of our staff, say what you want to us, we put our hands up for it. But do not be rude to our staff, please. Thank you.
Thank you for putting that so eloquently, and also Tanya, thank you for issuing an apology to the staff whose statements you directed to them. So appreciate the apology as well. The next public speaker that we have is Sean Rush, who is joining via Zoom on behalf of Public Interest Law and Science Initiative Incorporated. If we have Sean with us, looks like it. Kia ora, Sean, can you hear us okay?
Yeah, I can. Thanks very much. And support those comments from the Mayor. Thanks very much for, I've got 5 minutes, I think, very quickly. Just wanted to give a heads up to the councillors that a couple of weeks ago, I wrote to the Ministry for Environment suggesting that this issue around what sort of climate model should be used was so important, not just for Kapiti Coast, but for all our coastal communities, and actually for adaptation planning generally, that it would be in the public interest for it to be submitted to the High Court for a determination once and for all. And I felt that that was an honest and open way, and I provided, I think you've got the letter that I sent to them, heard back about 10 minutes before this meeting started, pleasantly declining my invitation, not surprisingly. I guess I'm not going to go over the background to this. I think you've heard enough, but in summary, we've got the legislation under the coastal policy statement saying that decision makers should be using and analysing the national guidance and take account of the likely effects of climate change. The Ministry for Environment's advice is to use 4 different climate models, and one of them has been determined as being unlikely. And in fact, overnight, the methane panel review group full of experts have actually come out and said that they find it interesting. Well, first of all, they said that they wouldn't expect to use the IE model for their report, and they found it interesting. They called it unlikely, found it interesting that MFE were continuing to use it for coastal planning. So I'm very confident that that particular model is not within the statutory framework. That said, I think we need to really have a look back up the truck and understand the difference between what Dr. DeLonghi has said and what the Jacobs report says, because the sea level models don't really depart going forward until about 2050. So, if we've got something written on our LIN report that says there might be coastal inundation, it probably needs to be updated to say, but not until 2050, which is not really relevant to either mortgage providers or for insurers. But that's a separate matter. But what we can see is that Dr. DeLonghi has taken, in fact, Jacobs as well, have looked at history, can see where the shoreline has advanced over the years, going back several thousand years in Dr. DeLonghi's case. And he projects that going forward and has identified that there's something which we didn't know about called accommodation space. And that basically means that as sea level rises at the sort of rates we're seeing, sediment gets deposited, and that's why our beaches are getting bigger, and the beach in front of my place gets closer to Australia. And it insulates us from coastal hazard. And if Dr. DeLonghi's analysis is correct, and I've got no reason to think it isn't, then a lot of what we're talking about and the heartache and so forth and expenditure really is a bit superfluous. So I think that one of the points that you conclude on in one of the recommendations is to go forward with the CAP recommendations to begin about how they might be implemented based on the Ministry for Environment's advice. But their advice that came out in February this year is meant to be supplemented by 2 other chapters, one dealing with sea level rise and coastal accretion, which is really important, and the other is about their advice on community engagement. So you've got this, my observation of the current Ministry for Environment's guidance is that it's quite deficient in a lot of areas. It really focuses on 2 very important aspects, which the 2 lead authors are qualified and expert in, and that is the sea rise model, which we've talked about, and we've got issues around the vertical land movement, but that's all been watered down in the ministry's guidance anyway, and that leaves just the sea level rise model based on some of these higher end models. And the other is the dynamic adaptive pathway approach, which is really led and authored and owned actually by one of the authors, Judy Lawrence from Victoria University. But all the other things, like accretion, like erosion, like sediment supply, is kind of absent, whereas the previous 2017 guidance had quite a lot of information on it. So I just think that we need to understand that the MFE guidance that you refer to is deficient in a number of very vital areas. They were planning on issuing those chapters this year, but it's been overtaken by the government's adaptation inquiry panel and subsumed into that body of work, and so we won't see it anytime soon. So I just think that that the tools that we have available are not really there. That all said, Dr. DeLonghi's report, I again congratulate the Mayor for coming along to the meeting, and you can see that everything he said kind of made sense to everybody. I mean, everyone knows that we live on the coast, it's accreting, we're not seeing it going backwards, and here's the reason why. And you do a bit of a Google on accommodation space, which I'd never heard of, and what do you know? It is a real thing. This is what happens And so I do think that needs to be, that's the important differential. So that's all I've got to say. Happy to take any questions.
Great, thank you, Sean, and really well timed. The 5-minute sound just chimed, so appreciate that as well. We'll
Camera zoomed into you. I think there was a hint.
We'll see if there's some questions from the table. I'm not seeing. Oh, yep, Councillor Cooper.
Thanks, Sean. You're always interesting to listen to, which is good. How important do you think it is for KCDC to progress the statutory requirement of the coastal plan change prior to burying ourselves in adaptation work, or is it, or does it not matter?
I think you need to really get to the bottom of this accretion trend, the differences between DeLonghi and Jacobs, because I think that if DeLonghi's correct, then I think his recommendations conclude that we should be putting in a tide gauge at Kapiti Island and putting in much more and better and local monitoring. We should improve the vegetation that's being used. He started his presentation talking about vegetation. I was going, what's going on? But it's really crucial. Not mentioned by Jacobs or Ministry of Environment. So I think you need to get to the bottom of that because that will then dictate exactly what sort of steps might need to be taken. And also, let's not forget, there is alignment about some areas that have got erosion problems and are going to be in danger. And there needs to be decisions made about how you deal with that.
Great, thank you. Well answered, as always.
Great, thank you. Councillor Wilson.
Yeah, thanks for that, Sean. As far as I'll go back to the LIM report. I'm assuming you have a view. You're like me, you've got a view on everything. A view about the DeLonghi going on to the LIM report. Do you see any issues with that?
No, I mean, I think that if council, as they have taken the view and legitimately that there is information that affects the title and so forth, then it's right to do it. I just think though that the LIM notation that went on didn't really give the sort of information that I mentioned, which was that, the inundation, if it ever arises, is not till the second half of the century. So, I think, I do know that insurance companies, when they are screening, will look at LIM reports, and also buyers, they'll get their package from the real estate agent, and LIM report will be there. So I do think it's important that the uncertainties associated with this accretion or erosion trend are highlighted.
Yeah, thank you.
And last question, Councillor Halliday.
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the letter you sent through, Sean. I found it really interesting reading. My question, I've mentioned before that I was appreciative of Crew with regards to the insights they've given me when they've sat down and talked through PP scenarios, 8.5, etc., and other things there as well. And I found your letter proposal to government quite enlightening as well with regards to the likelihood versus having 4 different models to use, and I think it was quite relevant. So I was looking forward to potentially the government taking that on board and seeing where that went, because potentially there's a case law option there, I don't know as such. But my question is, in relation to this report, because this is really what we're talking about today, and this report's trajectory, shall we say, do you believe that as we move forward, that it gives the ability for what you've been talking to be taken into consideration as part of the coastal plan?
I think there are some fundamental aspects of the CAP report that go to direction, right, that are still uncertain, particularly as shown up by the DeLonghi report. And as I say, whether you've got an accretion trend through to 2050 or it stops next year and starts eroding is a critical factor to take into account when you're making determinations, I think, Martin. So I think that I'd be wary about going ahead based on the CAP recommendations when those recommendations are based on an eroding trend which we're not seeing.
Look, hearing what you're saying, Sean, and I don't disagree with you. What I was asking was, you've got the recommendations, but the recommendations are really setting up a foundation as we move forward with regards to how we address, and as part of the process with regards to advancing the coastal plan change. There'll be other forms of information that will be used. My question was, do you believe that there's the ability for those conversations to be had as we move forward in this treaty? In other words, they're not being shut out.
There's nothing stopping council or councillors or staff having discussions about all this, but I do think that if it's within the framework of the CAP recommendations, which are, have been shown to perhaps be underpinned by Jacobs. Jacobs have used the high-end scenarios, called it status quo. That is completely wrong. Now it is. Now it is. It wasn't back in 2021, but now it is. I think, Martin, you need to start these conversations on the right foot. So I do think that it would be a barrier to good community discussion if you were to go ahead, approve the CAP recommendations, and then start those discussions. I think that would be a negative way to start them.
Interesting. Okay, thank you for your perspective.
Great, thank you so much, Sean. That's all the questions that we have from the table. So thanks for zooming in. Have a good rest of your day.
I'll carry on watching for a bit, but thank you.
Oh yeah, cool, no worries. All right, next up we've got Steve Tomlinson. We've got Sleeman next. Cool, your microphone's all on and working, so you've got 3 minutes and over to you.
Thanks. Excuse me. Councils works best when their decisions in respect of major financial expenses mirror the community that they serve. A good example of a common sense approach is KCDC's decision not to bail out Wellington Water. Comments from councillors were that there was no benefit to Kapiti ratepayers, but a cost of $5,000 per ratepayer, which KCDC could not justify. And no one wanted to go with Wellington, the decision being not just a pragmatic one, but a community-supported one. Sadly, KCDC will not apply the same common sense principles to manage retreat. So, looking at the current agenda, paragraph 5, KCDC were to, after the 20th of June, seek feedback from the Insurance Council. Then, 30th of October, the CE wrote a letter to the Insurance Council. It appears as the attachment to 9.3. The CE knows the purpose of any letter is to seek an informed reply, but the papers do not record that any answer has been received, or if so, any outcome. Therefore, my point is, how can KCDC proceed today with option A if no reply has been received without the feedback required by CAP and is adopted? Then, moving further forward, the CE's letter, 30th of October, outlines some current concerns raised reinsurance, and it also invites the Insurance Council to respond or to come to a public meeting to discuss as an option. And that's contained in the letter at questions 2.3. Nevertheless, here we are today, carrying on regardless. If it's not sensible to have Kapiti ratepayers pay $5,000 each, how then can it be sensible to burden them all with a debt of $850 million? I then looked at the tables. So if we look at the table 2 options, and I put my hand over the option A and B column. Once you've done that, I read the benefits and the risk columns. And then when you do that, I'd like you to all look at it and tell me if you could slide a cigarette paper between either of the benefits or the risks. They are interchangeable in my mind. Anyway, there are other risks that they're raised in the in 9.3. the additional cost and time. How about using the other reports, including the Delaney which is available, saving both? The bonus for that would be KCDC actually having a balanced view, not the current one, which allowed Jacobs in the CAP to review their own Jacobs report for KCDC. And we're talking about here in this report reputational risk. Logic would suggest that KCDC's reputation is enhanced more by making common sense decisions than trying to con yourselves that by not doing option B, your community would not hold you in good regard by voting for A. Therefore, and I would urge you to vote for option B, since in my mind, a vote for option A would be like spitting in the eye of all your ratepayers. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Do we have questions from the table? I'm not seeing any. Nope, not seeing any lights there. Appear to be no questions. So it looks like you've covered.
Can I ask myself a question?
If you can answer it in 30 seconds, go ahead.
Yeah. So the question is, why do I think we're here? And I think we're here because the council can't administratively admit that they were conned by Jacobs. And now what you're doing is funding and funding and funding to justify something that is basically unjustifiable. And I'm not necessarily blaming anybody that. It's an institutional problem that people have written about, you know, people more educated and more intelligent than me, and this is the issue. What you've got to do is when you're in a relationship and there's a problem, at some point you draw a line and start again. And there's nothing wrong with admitting that you made a decision that was incorrect based on what you knew at the time. What is wrong is when you keep pumping it and pumping it and pumping it, and you'll spend millions to prove that you were right. And that's wrong.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, and our last public speaker for this morning is Salima Padamsi. Welcome to the table. And so, Salima, we've got 5 minutes allocated for you, but as mentioned, it might not take that long. But no pressure, you've got that allocated, so if you need to use it,
great.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I am addressing you today regarding Agenda Item 9.3, responding to the Coastal Advisory Panel's report. I urge you to vote for option B that reads, do not progress the proposed work program as described in paragraph 9 and table 1 of your paper. The Council is obligated to fulfill its immediate statutory requirement regarding coastal management. This obligation is detailed in the Memorandum of Understanding established between the Council and the Coastal Ratepayers United. A copy of this agreement has been distributed to all parties, along with the letter to the CEO, which serves as a notice of dispute under the terms of our Memorandum of Understanding. CREW asserts that the Planning Department should postpone all coastal matters except for preparing and notifying a coastal hazard district plan change to a later date. The Council should direct the district plan manager to promptly initiate work on the district plan change and establish a project timeline for public notification by mid-2025. The court records indicate that the Council committed to notifying a coastal hazard plan change in 2020. At that time, the necessity to complete the CAP process was cited as additional delays. With the completion of the CAP process now, any further postponement in progression of the plan change is deemed unacceptable by Coastal Ratepayers United. The Council has a 14-day period, including holidays and weekends, so it is not only 14 working days, to address this dispute with CREW. A resolution will require establishing a project timeframe for the RMA Schedule 1 process to commence, along with the notification date that is mutually agreeable to CREW. That's it.
Thank you, Salima. Questions, Mayor Holbrow?
Thank you, Salima. I'm a little bit confused because I thought what we were doing today was progressing towards the plan change, but you're advising us to vote against further investigation and analysis, which is all we're doing today, is doing some investigation and analysis around trigger points, thresholds, the kind of thing that we'll need for the district plan change. So if we let this work go, then we have to start all over again, and surely that would take longer. So I'm a little bit confused as to what you're asking us to do today.
Yeah, I can understand that. So, first of all, you don't need to start over. Plan change has to be in line with the New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement, not with the advisory, not with an adaptation. Adaptation is not a statutory requirement of this country or of this council, but the New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement is. So so you can have parts of adaptation that you might want to put into a coastal plan change, but because this council has not undertaken Policy 24 or given effect to Policy 24 within the New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement, that makes any recommendations made by CAP not fit for the purposes of planning. So I will explain that further to you. So the New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement for a coastal hazard plan change consists of Policy 24, 25, and 27. 24 identifies the areas of high risk. So once you know what the areas of high risk are, then you can look at managing those risks. So whether there's triggers, thresholds, and by the way, that trigger and threshold, they're not new ideas. In the proposed district plan submissions of 2012, on a submission that I personally wrote on behalf of myself and my husband, put in triggers, signals, and thresholds. So it's not new.
They're also in the DeLonghi report.
They're also in the DeLonghi report. So those are not new things. But you cannot do a coastal hazard plan change based on what you have here today. You have a coastal hazard risk assessment that was commissioned by Dr. DeLonghi, by us, for Dr. DeLonghi, and the Waikato University. You also have a verified peer review, not a PAL review, which the Jacobs report has. So unless you do a Policy 24 that identifies areas of high risk, you cannot continue any of this work. And to date, Council has not done it, but we have done it for you through the Waikato University.
While you're on the DeLonghi report, is that peer reviewed or
Yes, it
PAL
is.
reviewed or neither?
It's peer reviewed, and you have a copy, and it's been peer reviewed by Dr. Ian Wright, and it's an academically fulfilled peer review.
Could you explain the difference between that peer review and the peer review we have for the?
So you don't have a peer review, you have a PAL review. So you have a one-page letter from Becca that says, thanks for the report, it looks good, you've done really well, thanks again for letting us read it. So Dr. Ian Wright's report actually goes through all the details of Willem's report and challenges them and comes up with conclusions to either validate them or not validate them. And that report does not exist within this council.
Okay, that's a good clarification to have as well. Thanks, Halima.
Yeah, thanks for taking the time to answer those questions. Appreciate it. We'll go to Councillor Pravanov next.
Yeah, thank you through the chair. Thank you, Salima, for coming along today to speak to this item 9.3. So, table 1 lays out assessment of the next practical steps. The last item in that table talks about statutory RMA coastal adaptation planning. Can you talk to me about whether or not this is actually a statutory requirement in terms of preparing the coastal district plan?
Okay, thank you, Jocelyn. There is no statutory requirement to do a coastal adaptation planning under the RMA. What you are required under the RMA is to follow the New Zealand Coastal Policy for Coastal Hazard Plan Change. And I'm going to talk you through that again, if you don't mind. So if you look at the panel recommendation, it talks about mapping risk, but mapping risk refers to New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement number 24, which this council has not done. But Policy 25 and 27 are looking at mitigation, of which adaptation could be a part of, but not until you have done Policy 24. So, and the policy is written in sequence. So you have 24, 25, 26, 27. So you cannot do 25 and 27 without doing 24. It doesn't make logical sense.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Pravanov. Can we keep moving? Is that okay?
So I have another question then.
Okay, just one more question.
Yes, so then in relation to Dr. DeLonghi's report, how does that fit into that work?
So Dr. DeLonghi actually did. His terms of reference that were written by CREW were actually cut and paste from the New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement. Policy 24, 25, and 27 were his reference points for his report.
So it has been done by Dr. DeLonghi,
Correct.
but not included in this paper?
Correct.
For consideration. Thank you.
Correct.
Councillor Cooper.
Thanks, Sulema. It's good to get that. You can almost see it, so it's good for us around the table. So why is it the importance of the coastal plan change in terms of for KCDC and respect to adaptation, which is the report's adaptation, but why what's
Yep.
the connection here?
Well, I'm struggling to see it myself, so let me tell you what I see. So in 2016, we were in the Environment Court, and we were also in the High Court. And at that time, the council had promised both courts that by 2020, a coastal hazard plan change would be notified. So to date, that has not been notified. But I'm not so sure how council took that Environment Court ruling for coastal hazard plan change under the New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement and turned it into a coastal adaptation process, which is non-statutory, non-required. You're not required to do it, you chose to do it. And that still means that you are not in line with that court ruling of the Environment Court of 2016. And that's why you have my notice of dispute.
So it'd be your view or the view of CREW that we should progress the coastal plan change with haste and then work on adaptation?
I think if you get your coastal hazard plan change in place, notified, go through the submissions process, you have then time to work through the adaptation and see how you want to integrate it into an annual plan, into a long-term plan. And by that time, so there is no rush to do it now. Right now, your immediate statutory obligation is a coastal hazard plan change.
Thank you. Well answered.
And last question, Councillor Wilson.
I'll just start by agreeing with you because it's dangerous not to. I agree that the coastal hazard plan change should be the priority. The DeLonghi report addresses that.
Correct.
And addresses section 24.
Correct.
The Jacobs doesn't. But do you think there's any value in the Jacobs report that could feed into the coastal hazard plan?
I think that what you're looking at is the rule of the law for this country is looking at the likely effects of climate change. That's in line with New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement 24. What Jacobs have done is look at the unlikely effects of climate change, which is not by any, I don't even know why that was done. But the point is, so this is a question that we've been asking our team of experts. If you tweaked Jacobs here and you tweaked it a bit there and you did this, would it be worth would it be fit for the purposes of planning? Because Dr. DeLonghi in his report says very clearly in black and white that the Jacobs report cannot be used for the purposes of planning. So the answer is no. No amount of tweaking will bring it up to a statutory required standard for Jacobs.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sulema, for coming along this morning. It's been a great conversation. And to all of the public speakers, we appreciate you coming and engaging. Thanks for taking note of the comments of the Mayor around respect. And I think, we had some really useful exchanges despite some of that rub that existed. But again, we appreciate you being with us. So we'll now move on to deputations, of which there are none. Members' business, leave of absence, matters of urgent nature, haven't been made aware of either of those or any items under either of those. And updates, there are none. So that takes us through to item number 9, reports. Now we will take a short 10-minute break, so come back at 5 minutes to 11. Please be prompt because we've got quite a bit to get through. Thanks.